Okay, hello, Donald, Anushka, Francie, Christine, Christina, Moss, and Sman. Glad that you're all here. Hello, Lucas.
Hey there.
Okay, so as per usual, we'll take a few minutes to get settled in, find our meditation position to start to pump our brakes, start to slow down from the pleasures or the pains that we've been going through, the thoughts, the ideas. Just start to get comfortable and slow down all that activity. And whenever we join an event like this, a meditation, um, it's immediately, we're here in the space together. We're here in the meditation hall. Of course, it's mainly online, but still, when we go into that space, it's to be quiet. Um, and we immediately have uh, the opportunity to start our practice, to start meditating, to start slowing down. All right, welcome, Chris, Bree, Courtney, Jamie, Anushka. Hello, Anna. Welcome, Bo. Okay, nice to see you, Moss. And welcome, Miti. We have Susan over on YouTube. As always, that's great. Welcome, Blinky. And Cliff, hello. Hey, Eddie. Welcome, Danny. It's just about 3 more minutes till we start. Hey, Suraj and Anastasia. Okay, and welcome to Wessel. All right, so a very sincere, appreciative welcome to everyone who's here, everyone who's joining. We're here for a very specific purpose that is unlike most things in our life, surely. Rather than to pick ourselves up, to pick the mind up, to get involved with the mind, our thoughts, our stories, our preferences, our idea of how we're doing, how our progress is going or is not going, our idea if we're in heaven or hell, or this isn't right or that's wrong. We're here to kind of put all that down and open ourselves up to train the mind, to release, to detach, to let go, but to be fully aware in the process of doing that. So the format that we are utilizing to do that together is in our Buddha Book Club. We're reading together, exploring together the teachings of Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm is a monk, a man from uh, England, I believe originally, who lives in Australia now and has spent decades upon decades upon decades training the mind, examining the mind, looking deeply into the nature of suffering, the nature of reality. Decades upon decades of not looking for pleasure, not trying to avoid pain, but looking directly into what is going on at this moment. Training the mind, living ethically, waking up. So we're very fortunate and lucky to be reading this text together that originates from Ajahn Brahm. In another time, another place, so much of this wouldn't be possible. And it's even, it's kind of surprising that it's possible right now that anyone who's here at this moment hasn't gone through a great catastrophe, gone through some kind of loss or something that interfered with you being able to be here right now. Maybe you were just so depressed, so down in the dumps that you couldn't to bring yourself here, right, to practice and to listen to these teachings. But somehow we are all here. We have all made it here. So there's a real treasure and freshness and wholesomeness to this moment that we can appreciate the goodness of what we're doing. At least the intention is good. There's some goodness in that intention. We can really recognize that and recognize that we are here practicing together. But we are practicing alone together. And how can you be alone together? Well, that togetherness is based on stillness, based on silence, not our ideas about each other, not our preferences, likes or dislikes, what makes us unique, but the stillness that we are all connecting with, all vibrating with at this moment. And so that stillness is really profound and something that we need to value greatly to come together in this way. This silence, this openness, this directness of our experience, the intimacy of it. So often we are in a rush to cover up that intimacy with some kind of idea or belief, some kind of movement, some kind of talk that overlays our experience. But here we have this real opportunity to put all that down and to be alone together in this stillness and that silence. So we'll start our practice together as we usually do with being alone together in that stillness. So take a moment to find your meditation position. That is a comfortable and stable position in which to put the body down. That is, we find a position where we aren't holding ourselves up, but where we can let go and still be upright, still be awake and aware. Our shoulders can be back, our chest opened up, our head upright, so the lungs can breathe easily. Meditation is a unique activity because usually we think about, to relax or to be in a state of silence, we're going to sleep, right? So a lot of times people's meditation practice can be very sleepy. When we bring our shoulders back and our spine to be straight and our head to be up, it's easier to be wakeful, gives us a kind of energy. So finding our meditation position, comfortable and stable. We can take 2 or 3 deep breaths at our own pace. Feeling the breath coming into the body and feeling the mind come home to the body at this moment. Start to let gravity do its work. The body naturally becomes still. And the mind also starts to settle, to be more in the present rather in the past or the future, to be more in this mode of noticing and looking rather than ideas and judgments, reactivity. We can close our eyes if it's comfortable to do so. Allow the breath to find a natural rhythm, flowing in and flowing out. Practicing alone together, just breathing, just being aware. At this moment, letting the body come to a rest, allowing the mind to put down its work, put down its struggle, and to practice just breathing, just being aware. To open our whole heart to this moment. So often we are willing to open our heart to struggles and conflict, self-criticism. But how wonderful it is to open our heart to this stillness, to open our heart fully to the breath, to the body sitting still, fully aware of reality as it is at this moment, being fully aware of that, aware of being aware, aware of just sitting here right now, just breathing. As we are aware of the body, we can smile at the body, not taking it so seriously, but understanding that it's a temporary phenomenon. Even if we did everything in our power, even if we did everything perfectly, this body will fade away. Breathing deeply, aware of the mind, we can smile at the mind, our thoughts, our ideas, those cycles that we go through. Not taking the mind too seriously, recognizing that no matter what we do, this mental state, all mental states are impermanent. If you are aware of it, it's going to change. It's not going to stay around. Breathing and being aware of the body and mind We can smile to the body and mind, seeing them just as they are at this moment, with a sense of gentle, caring attention. Not taking the body or the mind too seriously, just being aware, gentle, caring, watering those seeds of, I really do want to take care of the body and mind. I really do want to be at peace. I really do want to be kind, gentle, and understanding with myself, regardless of the situation or state I find myself in. So breathing in deeply, fully aware of the body and mind. As we breathe out, we can relax, let go, refresh, and restart this awareness, this body and mind. We can open our eyes if we like, or keep them closed. And we will begin on chapter 4 of Ajahn Brahm's book, The Art of Disappearing, which is entitled Medicines for the Mind. Chapter 4, Medicines for the Mind. Certainly something all of us can use. The practice of meditation is a well-worn path for calming the mind and bringing it into a state of peace, power, and happiness. We really need to remember that when we are going through suffering and difficulty, rather than being attached or addicted to our suffering, to our habits, we can remember this clear teaching that the practice of meditation is a well-worn path for calming the mind and bringing it into a state of peace, power, and happiness. This practice has been going on for such a long time that any problem you may be having now has already been faced and overcome by many others in the past. What's important is how we remember the strategies for overcoming these obstacles and our motivation and diligence in putting them into place. That is, how we employ the medicines that cure the diseases of the mind. So we've got to keep trying. That's what's important. If you believe in the medicine or you think you're living in a certain way and that's good, that's fine. But what is really important is to remember the strategies for overcoming these obstacles, to bring up the motivation and to diligently, regularly, consistently put them into place. Put these strategies into place. Employing the medicines that cure the diseases of the mind. Boredom. One of the major problems that can arise during a long retreat is boredom. When I was a young monk in Thailand, we would often complain that there were too many things going on. There was too much work, too many people, too many ceremonies, too much morning chanting, too much evening chanting. I would sometimes fantasize about being in a monastery where there were no meetings and where you hardly had any work to do, so you could sit and walk all day. I fantasized about such monasteries, but of course, you get bored and restless in a place like that. So the mind is always idealizing this other time, this other place, this other situation to be in, when things will be more ideal for practice. And it's a really great trick that we say Mara in Buddhism, but this kind of selfish quality of mind, this illusory quality of mind that is addicted to self. Whether that's a painful self or a pleasurable self, it is addicted to running away from and chasing. So we have to be very aware when that mind state comes up, well, this isn't the right time, this isn't ideal. Right now I'm not in the right frame of mind to study or to meditate. That's just the illusion. That's just the self-clinging. And if you step into it, step through it, it will vanish just like that. But it's that stepping through, that kind of cutting through that is very, very difficult. So we have to work on that. We have to notice that state of mind that says, well, I could do that, I'd like to do that, but it's not the right time. I'm not really in the mood. Yeah, step through it, cut through it with the diamond thunderbolt sword, the Vajra sword, the sword of wisdom. Yeah, just step through it, take a shot, give it a try. And over time, we realize, this is all about consistency. It's all about trying and trying and failing. Over time, we realize that difficulty to do what we would like to do, what we know is skillful, and what we know would bring us benefit, we start to realize that the barrier to that is just a fog. It's just a phantom. It's nothing. We just have to step through it. We have to practice. We have to try. You suffer a lot, and your fantasy turns around. If I could only find a monastery where there was work or something to do, maybe I could talk to someone or at least take part in some chanting and group meditation in the evening. So you see, it's both sides. The game just keeps playing. Well, once I go to that kind of place, then I can then I can practice, right? But then you're there and you want to go to the other kind of place. So we just have to shake off the ice, to start walking, to start getting involved, and stop taking these excuses, physical, bodily excuses, or mental excuses so seriously. But just to get involved and to do it regularly, to do it daily at least. But this is missing the whole point. Because the standard in the suttas, the original Buddhist teachings, and in the forest tradition is to spend lots of time in solitude, to have little work and little contact with others. Those of you who have investigated the teachings of the Buddha in the suttas and the Vinaya know that seclusion is important. I try my hardest to arrange my monastery to give the maximum possible seclusion and the fewest number of meetings. Of course, the result may be the arising of boredom, restlessness, and fantasies, or getting fed up with your own company. Nevertheless, it's worth facing those obstacles and finding the strategies to overcome them. You should investigate boredom. Where does it come from? Often boredom arises during a transition from being busy to being settled. Some young people who come to a retreat or a monastery get bored because there are no televisions or iPods. There isn't much to entertain you. When you look at boredom, you see that it's a reaction to relative levels of busyness. It arises because of the difference between your previous level of activity and what you are facing now. What is exciting in a monastery, like having toast in the morning, would seem boring to most people in the world. They would think, what's the big deal? Is that all you guys fantasize about? What's actually happening is that the mind isn't used to dealing with the subtle and peaceful states that result from reduced activity. It hasn't adjusted to the lack of stimulation, and it needs time to settle down. Although moving from activity to less activity may make you bored at first, after a while you start to wake up to the interesting aspects of that lifestyle, to the joy and delight of being alone and not having much to do. It's like going from a lit room into a dark room. At first you can't see. It takes a while for your eyes to adjust to the darkness. Only then can you see the shapes of things. In the same way, when you go from activity to less activity, it takes time for the mind to adjust to the lessening of sensory stimulation. After a while, it does adapt, and what was once boring and uninteresting, with little to attract the mind, starts to become beautiful and delightful. So the first strategy when you are bored is to be patient with that boredom. Leave it alone. Don't try to fill that hole of boredom with activity. So this is something that we can all try to do this exercise. Um, just as an experiment, just as something to try, right? The next time when we feel bored, um, be patient with that boredom, leave it alone, and investigate it, look into it, and be patient with it. Sit just for a few moments with that boredom, with that feeling. Don't try to fill that hole of boredom with activity. If you do, you are just stimulating the mind again. It's like going outside at night and turning on a light. You miss the experience of the more subtle shapes in the darkness. Recently, I went to a social gathering with the famous scientist Sir Roger Penrose, where part of the program was to look through telescopes. It happened to be a clear night, so we could actually see things like Jupiter and its moons. But when we first went into the observatory, we had to wait for a few moments after the lights were turned off to let our eyes get accustomed to the starlight. It was just a case of waiting a while, and then we were able to see the beautiful stars in the sky. In the same way, you need to dim the sensory activity if you want to see the beautiful stars in the mind. I am not only talking about the nimitta here, but also the subtle, peaceful, beautiful happiness that occurs when the five senses are subdued. So, not only talking here about a very pointed, direct, bright light of concentration, but actually a general sense of wellness and happiness when the senses are subdued, when the senses are calmed. This is oftentimes what people experience when they go out into nature, right? We go for a really wonderful walk in the woods or in a forested area or on the beach, and somehow the senses are kind of naturally calmed and subdued because there's less like hardcore stimulation going on. It's not, yeah, it's still beautiful, it's still fragrant and colorful and nice, but it's not this intensity of electricity and sounds and visuals and movement. There's a stillness in nature that we can connect with, and the senses naturally calm down. So there's a subtle, peaceful, beautiful happiness occurs when the five senses are subdued. So when you calm down the senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, it's quite common to go through that stage of boredom. When the lights are turned off and you can't see, there is nothing to grab your attention. What's important here is to be patient and have faith that the mind will soon begin to see things that are very interesting, if you can only manage to stay with the boredom. I would also add that with a certain degree of patience and a certain degree of faith, that we will begin to see things differently, right? Even when we're in a kind of emotional situation or a mental situation that we're going through, right? Boredom, specifically boredom. If we can be patient and have faith that the mind will soon begin to see things quite differently, um, then we can kind of manage to stay with that boredom, be patient in that space. And of course, we all understand it's not difficult to have faith about this, that yeah, the mind is going to see things differently in a few moments. But oftentimes, our activity that is trying to avoid or to get rid of what we're experiencing is actually perpetuating that experience. So there's a real value to patience. And, to be patient, we have to have this kind of faith, this trust that, yeah, things are going to be different in a few moments. But our habit is the self habit, the self focused habit, one thing to another, one thing to another. Anytime we feel boredom or silence or stillness, we're kind of almost confused. There's nothing to be confused about. Just be patient, and in a few moments, things will start to appear differently. So, in the midst of boredom, what's important here is to be patient and have faith that the mind will soon begin to see things that are very interesting, if you can only manage to stay with that boredom. This, I would say, can also apply to Dharma talks. When we're looking on YouTube or we're looking online to listen to a talk from a teacher, if we can stay with those first few moments, those first few minutes of changing our receptivity um, to something that's not so much stimulating but more pacifying, it may begin to become very interesting if we can just be patient, not to be so entranced by the mind, enchanted by the mind, right? I don't like this. Well, who cares? Just sit there and listen to it for a little bit. Try it out. People who go to an art gallery or listen to fine music may get bored if they expect something more exciting, like a blockbuster movie or Jimi Hendrix. But after a while, if they can calm down that excitement of the senses, they get the chance to savor things that are far more delightful. So stay with that boredom. Don't interrupt the process. And after a while, the boredom turns into something beautiful. The mind opens up to a more subtle mental landscape, and you start to appreciate what can happen in solitude. But you need patience because sometimes it does take a long time. Um, Something that immediately comes to mind for me about this is working with children. Many people here may work with children in one capacity or another. Maybe you're an uncle or a mother or parent, something like that, right? So bringing children um, to experience that subtle mental landscape, that kind of peaceful happiness, that joy that can arise naturally when the senses are calmed, we can bring them into a space that facilitates boredom. Yeah, it's good for them to be bored, but you have to kind of make it a special experience, and you have to be very patient with them as you're facilitating boredom. And you've got to take them out of their element, bring them into nature, take them on a camping trip, take them to a place where they're not so, with adults, it's more difficult to do, right? Because adults have their own kind of, well, I've been around the block, I know how to stimulate myself. You're not going to trick me. You're not going to make me bored. But for children, you just take them out to the beach or to a place in the woods. They don't know what the heck they're doing out there. And so you're immediately able to facilitate their boredom. And over time, right, that boredom opens up. You got to be very patient with them and compassionate with them, and with ourselves too when we start to practice like this. But over time, that boredom turns into something beautiful. The mind opens up to a more subtle mental landscape. And they and you, right? We have to do this for ourselves, otherwise we can't do it for anyone else. Um, to start to appreciate what can happen in that peacefulness, in that boredom, in that calming of the senses. But you need patience because sometimes it does take a long time. Okay, so anyone have something to share or question on this topic of boredom?
Maybe about how can we notice that we are bored? Because I was trying to reflect on that. And generally, I don't think I feel bored, but that's just because I don't notice and I start another activity. So I don't know if there's an advice to look at boredom.
Yeah, so I think that it's going to be any time when we are going from what Ajahn Brahm says here, any time that we're going from a very stimulating place, and that might be your regular life, right? You might be a busy person. Anytime that you're going from a structured, regularly stimulated activity or schedule to an opening, that's a place where boredom is going to arise, right? Um, and looking closely and being patient with that space in between activities, being patient with that space in between thoughts, and noticing when, oh, now I'm finished with this activity and I don't necessarily have something to do next. So there's not much to do. You're finished with an activity and you're aware, right? So that's a place where boredom is likely to arise. Is that helpful, Anna?
Yes. Yes, I'm thinking on it, but yes, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Something to share on the topic of boredom? Okay. So let's continue on to restlessness. So restlessness. Another common problem is restlessness. You don't want to sit still. You couldn't, right? It's a restlessness. You couldn't sit still. So another common problem is restlessness. You don't want to sit still. The body is uncomfortable, or the mind just won't stay with the breath or any other meditation object you're trying to focus on. This happens when you use too much force. Sometimes the best thing to do is just to be patient and wait, to allow the restlessness to be rather than try to control it. One of the great strategies I often talk about is the one I call the water buffalo mind. This strategy is named after an incident that occurred just outside Wat Pa Nanachat in Thailand when Ajahn was the abbot and I was the second monk. Early one morning, when I had already gone on alms round, Ajahn Jagaro was still in the monastery. A man came running into the monastery with half his finger missing. He had been taking his water buffalo out to graze when the water buffalo got scared and tried to run away. The rope holding the water buffalo was wound around the man's finger, and when he tried to hold the water buffalo back, the rope tore half his finger off. Of course, it was a very bloody finger, so Ajahn Jagaro immediately got a car and took the man to the hospital. I saw him a couple of days later with bandages on, and then later with only half a finger. This happened because he didn't know how to deal with a restless water buffalo. He should have just let it go. You should use the same strategy when the mind is restless. Just let it go. Don't try to hold it back. If you try to stop or control it, the mind just gets more wanton and more difficult. All you need to do is say, okay, mind, if that's what you want to do, off you go. Your job is just to be mindful and at peace and watch where this silly old mind wants to go. Your job is not to stop the mind, but to watch it, understand it, and be kind and gentle with it. So this instruction here is directly talking about our practice in meditation. This teaching could be appropriated to mean, well, I'll just let my mind do whatever it wants to do, and that somehow that's some kind of special wisdom that you have, right? That you just let the mind do whatever it wants to do, and if so facto, well, you're basically enlightened anyway. Um, so that's not what this teaching is about. It's very practically when we experience a sense of restlessness in the mind, in our life. It's just restlessness in our life. Don't try to stop or restrict or corral this water buffalo of restlessness, but truly say to the mind, okay, mind, if that's what you want to do, off you go. Don't be too overly involved or think that you can totally restrict or control it, because you couldn't. Now, in some sense, you can apply it to, leading around a water buffalo. But when it comes to our very strong negative habits, habits of mind, habits of body, we want to be very careful with that. Just don't let it go. But if it does happen, you understand that it's just a water buffalo. You couldn't really control it. So try to be careful, try to be restrained in your senses and your activities. But also understand this practice of when the mind is restless, when you couldn't sit still, you couldn't relax, you couldn't stop this constant activity of the mind, this friction, right? Don't try to hold it back. If you try to stop or control it, the mind just gets more wanton and more difficult. All you need to do is say, okay, mind, if that's what you want to do, off you go. And so that's kind of a relax and a release. Not so much like, okay, water buffalo, let's go have a few shots, because we're just going to let the mind do what it wants to do, right? It's not quite that. Your job is to just be mindful and at peace. Watch where this silly old mind wants to go. Your job is not to stop the mind, but to watch it, understand it, and be kind and gentle with it. It is as if you are dealing with a little child who wants to run this way and that. Sometimes young children come to our monastery, and often they are very noisy. If you've had a nice meditation, the screaming of those children really pierces your mind, and it's quite unpleasant. But it is their nature to do things like that. You can't expect kids to do anything different. In the same way, it's the nature of the mind to be restless. So please don't feel guilty if your mind is restless. What's happening is not yours, it's not a me, and it's not a problem. It's just the nature of things, arising according to karmic causes from the past. So this restlessness and these states of mind is just arisings, happenings, phenomena. Too much self-identification with it. Either that it's very pleasurable and wonderful, or that it's, miserable and difficult and unpleasant. The more that you self-identify with those experiences, the more trouble you're going to be in. It's not me, it's not yours, it's not a problem. It's just the nature of things, arising according to karmic causes from the past. So cause and effect. That's it. It just arises that way according to causes from the past, from the limitless past, from thousands and thousands of years ago of interactions between people and animals and the environment. That's why these states, this restless mind of thinking and thoughts and judgment is coming up. It's not yours. It's not you. And it's not a problem. You can't go into the past and cancel out those causes. You are stuck with their results right now. If the mind wants to run off, the only thing to do is remember the Sama Sankappa, right intention. So remembering our right intention. Just let it go and be kind and gentle with it. So a big feature of this, what happened with the water buffalo? The man, he tried to get involved. He tried to hang on to that water buffalo. He tried to stop it. He tried to hang on to the rope. So what does that involve? It involves tension, squeezing, grabbing onto, getting a hold of it, right? So this real teaching here is about letting go, releasing. So when we are standing at the liquor cabinet, right, and we're smelling the bottle of cognac or whatever it might be, whatever addiction or whatever bad habit we have, right, let it go. And let that sense of restlessness, let that sense of difficulty and stress and thinking and thought, just let it go, let it flow. Don't try to hang on to it. Don't try to fix it, to get rid of it. If the mind wants to run off, if this restlessness has just got to happen, the only thing to do is remember the right intention. Just let it go and be kind and gentle with it. These beautiful teachings of the Buddha are straight to the point. And what does Buddha mean? Buddha means awake. We call the Buddha the awakened one, the one who is fully awake. Buddha has had his coffee. He's taken his shower. He's done his morning yoga. He's done his morning meditation. He's awake and he's ready. So these beautiful teachings of the Buddha, or complete wakefulness, are straight to the point. They show you that your attitude towards what's happening is the most important part of meditation. So let that water buffalo of a mind run off. If you do, you'll find that the water buffalo doesn't run very far before it settles down and waits for its owner. It's part of the family. It likes staying with its owner. So you only need to follow it for a short distance. It's a bit of extra exercise, but that's much better than having your finger torn off. Then you can grab the rope again and gently lead the water buffalo to where you wanted to take it in the first place. Maybe you've lost a little bit of time, but at least you don't have to go to the hospital. In the same way, when your mind gets restless, when it gets crazy and wants to do all sorts of stupid things, your job is to let it go with kindness and gentleness. That restless mind, it can really rip our finger right off. It can do a lot worse than that. So when you have that awareness, that to notice how restless the mind is, and to notice those stupid things, those coping mechanisms that we've developed in the past, right? Don't be shy to lay out Jesus on the cross, arms spread, legs dangling. Just lay out and let that mind go. Instead of trying to, get a hold of it and have your finger ripped off. Sure, you might lose some time. You might have some restlessness, some difficulty that you have to embrace. You might have a sense of weakness, a sense of confusion. But it's much better than having to go to the hospital. It's much better than getting our finger ripped off. It's much better than breaking our own heart. Just let it go. Stay up all night. Let the mind be restless. Don't fight with it. Don't try to hold on to it. You couldn't. We couldn't hang on to it. When your mind gets restless, when it gets crazy and wants to do all sorts of stupid things, your job is to let it go with kindness and gentleness. Forcing the mind is wrong, but so is indulgence. Both force and indulgence actually feed that water buffalo mind. By indulgence, I mean turning your mind towards sensuality, thinking about sex, the future, movies, or music, or whatever else you think about when you're restless. If you keep on leaning in that direction, of course, the mind will keep going that way. But if you stand back from your experience, if you take a step back from that experience with equanimity, with balance, if you let go, if you're kind and gentle, that water buffalo mind soon stops. That experience, that restlessness stops. It comes to an end. Dealing with restlessness doesn't need to be a battle. If it becomes a battle, perhaps getting even worse, it's because you are feeding it with negativity, guilt, or indulgence. You're not really facing it in the proper way. Instead of just allowing the old karma to ripen, you're making new bad karma. So sometimes we've got all kinds of bad seeds in our garden and they're ripening. Okay, that fruit is ripening. Just let it fall and turn into fertilizer. Don't actively get in the process because you're dealing with difficulty to make more difficulty. And it's a process. Okay, it's a way of engaging with our life. It's a way of taking care of our life. It's not, time to be perfect. It's something that we're continuously getting involved with. And we're touching that kind of wisdom that's there, innate wisdom in us, so that we can apply it when things really get heavy. So we don't make big mistakes. A lot of the path is just avoiding those big, big, big mistakes, those big arguments, those big turmoils, those big struggles, those big fights, those big relapses. And then over time, our mind becomes more relaxed, more restful, and we can take it to a more refined, more in-depth practice. Anyone have something to share about restlessness? Question or thought? How about Maya? Did you want to share something?
Yeah, hello. Um, I suppose in the previous section about boredom, I was relating it as to be similar to restlessness, but to see them divided up into two separate categories of kind of distractions, I thought was interesting. Um, Through my practice, I've had to deal with a lot of my own mind's kind of wandering, kind of stickiness, and kind of the same few thoughts kind of running around in my head. And I suppose the way I'm thinking of it is letting the water buffalo be rather than jumping on the water buffalo, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, that sounds right. You jump on the water buffalo, you wind up breaking your back. You try to hold onto the rope with your finger, you'll lose your finger. So it's really this teaching of to be a passive observer. So when you're restless, when you get into this state, boredom, but specifically restlessness, it's a little bit more stimulating. The mind's a little bit more active. When you're restless, just be at peace with it. Regard yourself as the passenger, not the driver. Regard yourself as the passenger, not the driver.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so any of these times when we are going through those difficult states of mind, our natural reaction, our habitual reaction is to self-identify with it. And that's where all the problems come up, because we're creating more and more and more self-identified effects, because we're self-identified actions, subtle actions of our mind, me, my, I, right? I've got to get a hold of this. I've got to take a drink. I've got to do something about this. When you're noticing, when you're fully aware that the mind is like that, especially with restlessness, is just to be a passive observer. And at least to do that as an exercise, do that as a practice. And then, you'll see how it affects you. You might make another mistake. You might plant a bunch of seeds all at once of negative karma because you get so self-identified with your experience. Self, 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 self. But even then, you have the practice first. You try it out first, that method, to be less disenchanted, because it doesn't matter how negative the experience of mind that we have is. It doesn't matter how many negative seeds of karma, causes that we've brought about, and how many negative fruits we have, just all over us, right, of our past actions. There's still no self in them. So when we're aware of that restless state of mind or that worked up state of mind, practice to just be a passenger. It's just something that's happening. You don't have to identify with it so much. Just be aware of it, let go, and give it that gentle, kind, patient attention. Anushka, did you want to share something?
Oh no, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right. So, let's sit together for a few minutes, a few moments, and let these teachings sink in. We can recognize that when we feel restlessness or boredom, we don't have to overly self-identify with it, but instead we don't have to fix it. We don't have to solve it. We can't necessarily, but to be aware of that restlessness and just let it go. Let the water buffalo be the water buffalo. Let the mind and its bubbling and its stress and its activity just be what it is. Being patient with the mental states that we have, very patient. And when we know that we're going through a particular difficulty, that is a habit of ours to get into a certain mental state, or a negative habit that we're moving away from, to be understanding and kind, and to take this hands-off approach. Let the water buffalo run. Let that crazy, restless mind, instead of doing any stupid activities, just let the mind run. Just be aware of the running mind. So let's all bring our hands together. When we do this activity of studying the Dhamma, practicing meditation, coming together as a community, when we look forward to it, we can know that it's good. When we are practicing it, we can know that it's good. When we look back on it, we can know that it's good. So all that in mind, as we finish, we can make a chant together to harmonize, to express our practice. Maybe the people in our home didn't know we were doing a good activity, so we're going to share the merits with them. We share the benefits of our practice in all directions with our voice, with this word sadhu. Okay, so we can chant it together. Sadhu. 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 Okay, thank you for all being here. It's always nice to gather together and support each other in this way and support our own wellness, our own well-being of mind in this way. Um, hope to see you all again soon. Okay, please take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.